Okay, tonight I'm going to have a special guest. I call him the Paul Revere of the UK. And the reason I've called him that is because this fella, Tommy Robinson, I liken him to Paul Revere. You remember how in our history books we learned that Paul Revere, when he heard that the English were coming, he rode on horseback up and down the countryside from town to town to town, yelling, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" And because of Paul Revere, many people were saved. Many lives were saved. Well, I call Tommy the Paul Revere of the UK. And Tommy's on the line. He should be. Hi, Tommy. Are you there? You are the founder, co-founder, and leader of the EDL for several years. Tell everyone who the English Defence League is.
Myself and my cousin Kevin Carroll in Luton. We had a soldiers' homecoming parade where the soldiers were coming back after a tour of duty, and they were attacked as they marched through the town by a group of Muslims, extremists, who were shouting at them, "Baby killers." They spat at some of them. There was a local lad called Scott Muntridge who died in fighting for that regiment, and his mum was there that day. They spat in her face. And it wasn't the fact that these extremists done this, because we know, I've grown up with many of these extremists, we know the hate that they're filled with. It was the fact for us was that they were facilitated in doing it and allowed to do it. The police knew full well beforehand they were going to do it. In fact, there was 10,000 leaflets given out to the Islamic community, recruiting, basically asking for more of them to come down and protest against the troops. So after that, this is like the final straw. Basically, in 2005, we held a demonstration when I was 21 called Ban the Luton Taliban. Because at that time, we'd seen that this group, Al Mujahideen, were sending people abroad to fight against our troops. And their head office was in Luton Town, just up the road from Luton Town Centre. Now, these people were recruiting for terrorism, and nothing has been done to stop it. So when we saw that when this happened, we organised a protest, a march through the town, basically, in support of our armed forces. And when we turned up that day to do this, which was members of our community, men, women, my uncles were there, my aunties were there, all my family were there, we were there to pay our respects, because we felt that the whole country, every time our hometown's name, Luton, is brought into the media or anywhere, it's to do with terrorism. It's to do with Muslim extremism. We had the fertiliser bomb plot was planned in Luton. The 7-7 bombers boarded their trains in Luton. We've had terrorist atrocity after atrocity planning from Luton. The Stockholm bomber who flew out, he was radicalised in Luton. He went out and blew himself up in Stockholm. So we wanted to show the whole country that people of Luton support our troops, and that Luton is not just a town that's full of terrorists. There's plenty of English people here as well, and we want our voice heard. And when we turned up that day, this developed into something about equal rights and the way we were treated. Because when we turned up that day, we were met basically with an iron fist by the police. We were put up against walls. We had to empty our pockets. We had cameras in our faces. We had to take our shoes off in the street. And when you compare this, I was there the day they protested against our troops, the day they attacked our soldiers. And the police wouldn't even look at them. They didn't even look at them. And this is some of the country's most radical Muslims were there. Our armed forces were there. They were not searched in the way that we were, or the manner that we were.
Tommy,
and then, yeah.
Why do you suppose that is? Do you think it has something to do with the hatred that was rampant in Europe in 2005 about the Iraqi war? You know, a lot of people were angry.
It's to do with not political correctness, which we'll get onto, which is completely out of control in this country. And it's to do with political correctness and fear of being called a racist, and that's what our police officers are dealing with and the police system are dealing with. They've got their hands tied on many issues, and they are basically facilitated it. And when we've turned up, they knocked my friend's teeth out. A police officer did with a cosh on his horse. Another horse flattened my uncle, and we watched. And if we weren't angry enough as people of Luton after what had happened to our soldiers, after this, you could have lit a match and the town would have set on fire, because everyone was so angry. They kettled us in a crowd, and all we wanted to do was get to the War Memorial. That's all we wanted to do. We weren't there for any trouble. We wanted to get to the War Memorial, to have a minute's silence and talk about the respect for our troops. The same War Memorial that they allowed extremists and terrorist supporters to stand at and mock our troops. And we weren't allowed to. And the police kettled us, and they were making women wee in the street. Women were held for 3 hours without being allowed to leave the police kettle. And So after that, we decided again to have another march, and this was the birth of we called it the United People of Luton, because originally this was a local issue. And this group of extremists, we followed them, we started looking into them more, and we saw that they were holding an Islamic roadshow, which they were travelling around the country basically recruiting for extremism. And they were in Birmingham, which, if you know Birmingham, it's England's second city, it's England's second largest city. And there was a young boy, and they were holding this roadshow, and there's a young boy that was 11 years old, and they had a big massive banner in the city centre, next to the shopping centre, and it read, "Jesus was a Muslim." And there's hundreds of them. And they stopped this young boy who was with his friend, and he was just out shopping, and they got him up on stage, and they made him repeat after him. Yeah, Anjem Choudary made him repeat after him. Now, for your viewers that don't know who Anjem Choudary is, he's the most radical Islamic cleric probably one of the most radical in the world. He's known throughout Britain. He's known throughout Europe. He's the leader of our extremist organisations.
Actually, yes. Let me say a little bit something about him. Choudary has been called the face of radical Islam in Great Britain, and he holds frequent rallies calling for Sharia law to be imposed in the UK. But I was under the impression that the Sharia for UK group had been banned. But
they get banned. They just change their name literally the next day, which they're not actually supposed to do. Because I had a court case over this where when there was a poppy burning incident, when they set fire to poppies on our Remembrance Day, on our Armistice Day, and all they done is change their name. So all the same members just completely rebrand, change their name. It's against counter-terrorism for them to do that once they've been outlawed, but they don't get prosecuted or they don't get
Why? Why don't they get prosecuted?
I don't know. It is. They seem fearful of him, and at the same time, I think Choudary could be beneficial for the authorities because he acts as a honey trap, which basically every extremist radical young Muslim goes to him. So the police probably look at a way that they know who they are and they monitor them. And there's 60% of their ex-members are in jail on terrorism offences. But then Lee Rigby's killer was one of his ex-disciples. And but then so Anjem Chowdary's converting this young 11-year-old boy, and he said, "Repeat after me." And then they've converted him to Islam in the middle of the city centre. He was shopping with his friend without his mum and dad. They're all screaming Allahu Akbar. And I remember sitting watching it online in Luton. And at this time, we were just the UPL, United People of Luton. And we watched that. And I thought, we'll wait and see what the Muslim local leaders say, what the politicians say. We'll wait and see what the newspapers say about what we've just witnessed. Because you know as well as I know, these radicals and their view of Islam, to be an apostate, which this young 11-year-old boy is going to be, he's not going to continue following Islam. He was out shopping in a day. Then his life's in danger as an apostate with so many radicals living in the area. And but there was silence. There was nothing from no outcry, no backlash. And because of that, we decided to leave Luton and go to Birmingham. And when we went to Birmingham, the local Muslim politicians then came out against us, screaming against us.
Okay, you just said something very interesting. You said the local Muslim politicians. You see, this is why I say that we need to vet all these Congress people and legislators that want to come into our country, want to become leaders, lawmakers, because we have some Muslims that are lawmakers. They insidiously, very slowly insinuate themselves into your politics and then want to turn your country around. That's what's happened in the UK.
We've got that with Lutfur Rahman in Tower Hamlets. He's now become the mayor, and he was kicked out of the Labour Party for his links to radical Islamic organisations. So he's kicked out of the Labour Party. They then go round and get a massive petition and get him voted in as a mayor. We already have a mayor of London, but he's now a mayor of Tower Hamlets, which is a borough within London. He then becomes in charge of £1 billion budget of taxpayers' funded money. He then stops siphoning off the money away from any moderate Islamic groups or any other religious groups within the area, and he's giving it all to the Bangladeshis and the Somalis, who are then keeping him in power. And there's a big investigation going on with him at the minute, but that's the same what we faced up there. We had a woman called Salma Yaqub who come out on the streets, and she had a clenched fist, and she basically incited this crowd of 500 Muslims to come and violently attack us, which they did. And this is what gave birth to the English Defence League. We went up there was newspaper pictures of English lads on the floor with 5, 6, 7 Muslims jumping on their heads. And we went back to Birmingham twice, and each time we went back, we were violently attacked in a big way. And We were only going up there. From our first demonstrations then, we had placards that said, Muslim, no problem, extremist Muslim, big problem. Different things like that. We made it clear we didn't want Nazis joining us from day one. And then, again, I was looking online, because we called ourselves the English Defence League, but I was looking online and I saw a Christian graveyard up in Manchester, alongside, I believe it was, an area in the north of England, where they had a bulldozer, and this bulldozer was basically desecrating Christian graves because they'd bought it as a mosque. And they were just bulldozing straight through these Christian grave headstones. And I remember watching it thinking, how is this happening? And this to me it's all been a learning curve, because I had my eyes were closed up until that point when the Soldiers' Homecoming. And then I started looking, listening, reading, finding out more. And when I saw this in Manchester, it was then, look, we're going to highlight that. We're leaving Birmingham, and we've had Birmingham, we're now going to Manchester. And obviously after, people say we're filled with hooligans. That's what a lot of people say. We're made up of hooligans. You have to remember that when we went to Birmingham, we were violently attacked in a massive way by massive numbers. The streets were littered with bricks. It took the police 3 hours. They had us locked into a pub, and they had to get double-decker buses. And then when they got us onto the double-decker buses, as we looked out all the side roads, there was bricks everywhere from all the Muslim youth who had been rioting for hours and attacking the police. And then they come and attack the buses. All the windows had come through. There was a full-scale riot in the middle of Birmingham city centre when we went up there. So then when we went to Manchester, obviously word had spread around the country. We'd videoed each incident, we'd videoed each demonstration, put them online. And when we turned up in Manchester over the desecration of these Christian graves, 2,000 young Englishmen, or 2,000 English men and women turned up. And the sort of people that turned up were the sort of people that are not going to back down. And I'll never slate them for it. Because I said after that, how many, say, middle-aged female school teachers are going to turn up on the street and oppose militant Islam when what will happen to you is local Muslim politicians will come out and rile up all the Islamic community so that they come out and violently attack you. And that's what's going to happen to you. You're going to get violently attacked and beaten, which is what happens when you oppose militant Islam in Britain. So when we went to Manchester, many young lads turned up of the opinion that they're not going to back down. And it takes a certain sort of man to do that, and a certain sort of person to do that. And they did in Manchester. And then that really lit the light for the English Defence League. And from there, it was a learning curve. We hadn't planned it. I hadn't planned it. Obviously, I used the name Tommy Robinson, and I was hiding behind a mask at this point. The reason why I was hiding behind a mask is I quite liked living a normal life, and I knew the consequences of speaking out about what we're going to. I never envisaged how difficult it would be. I always thought, it would come on top with Muslim gangs. I'd get violently attacked. I knew that, but I didn't realise quite how deep and dark the establishment would be in order to silence you in what you're saying, and the lengths they'd go to. And only now, when we're just, I don't know if you've seen recently about this Rotherham report with regards to the rape of a generation of young girls up in the north of England. That basically what the report says is, which we've known this is going on for years. We've been talking about this, and to be honest, I've been belittled when I've been speaking about this with journalists on TV and things like that. I've been belittled and mocked for it. And you really think there's a conspiracy of the police are conspiring with Muslim leaders and with councils? And for years we've known it's going on, and it's so frustrating when you know something's going on. And this is not just happening in Rotherham. This is happening in every town and city across this country that has an Islamic community. It's happening all across the country. And the police, the lengths the police were going to, when you look at it, in order to suppress this from coming out. Yeah,
because it's the same in different countries, in Norway and just in different places.
Sweden, in what you see is Malmo is the rape capital of the second highest rape rate in the world per capita is Malmo now. But the police were actually working actively to suppress this. So then when we've come on the scene as the English Defence League in 2009, we started going into Yorkshire, which is this police force, and we held a demonstration in Leeds. And after the demonstration in Leeds, I went to a hotel, and I stayed in a hotel. And the police come to the hotel, because wherever we went, the police did follow. Police come to the hotel, I thought nothing more of it. And then about 12 weeks later, I was at Luton Airport, and I was flying up to meet with members of the Scottish Defence League, which had just formed from the English Defence League. And it was the first time we were going to be able to meet up together. And I was held by special branch at Luton Airport. And then I was arrested on suspicion of a criminal damage. And it was baffled me when I got arrested. I thought, what is all this about? And when I got to a police station, they said they were raiding my mother's house, where my mum and dad live, and they were raiding my house for my wife and my kids. And they sent 15 police officers to each house. And when they went to my wife's house, they come with machine guns. Armed police went to the house. And they spent 6-7 hours in our properties. They took all the computers. They just ransacked the whole place, basically. And when I got into my interview, it turned out that basically when I was in this hotel, they're saying that, you know, the little metal link that connects the door in the hallway, they're saying that metal link had been broken, which was £30 worth of criminal damage. Now, they gave me bail conditions not to contact the EDL. They gave me my bail date was to coincide with a demonstration we'd planned again in Yorkshire. So when I look at it all now, this was a coordinated effort by the police to stop what we were saying and doing, because they didn't want the fact that all the young girls up there are being groomed and raped. They wanted to shut us up and they wanted to silence us. And the best way they thought to do that was to hit me. And 3 weeks later, after this, they dropped the charges. Now, I put a complaint in through the IPCC, and I only...
What is the IPCC?
It's the Independent Police Complaints Commission. So basically an independent group who if you complain against the police, then they look into it and they check all the statements and see what's going on.
Similar to our internal affairs.
Yeah, the same, yeah. And when they've done this, I put the complaint in, and I only got the results to this complaint 2013 at the end. So this is from 2010. I got it 3 years later, yeah. And the results of the complaint was that they had a statement from the manager of the hotel who told them clearly it was not me who committed this criminal damage. And they had that statement prior to executing their raids and warrants and coming to my house. So they knew I was innocent, and they come down in order to gain access into our house for their intelligence, to take our computers, and also to put me on bail conditions to limit us in what we're saying. Now, that was just there was other incidents before that, but that's just been the start of the police's actions, because it seems they've been in a mindset of containment. Like, rather than tackling any of these issues, they've been trying to contain them. Same with radical Islam and extremism and all these different sects.
Sounds very similar to our president, talking about making it manageable, making ISIL or ISIS manageable.
Yeah, instead of crushing it and defeating it, what we'll do is we'll just try and manage it and contain it. And that's what they've been doing here, the police. But obviously, we kept going and we kept travelling around the country, and obviously it was like a snowball that got out of control, and none of us had done this before. You have to remember that before the English Defence League, I was just working on a building site. So we were just normal, all of us are normal people. Everyone that joined the English Defence League, just normal people. Normal people, and with it, at the click of a fingers, everyone's trying to do extraordinary things. We're trying to run a bigger street protest movement that obviously it reached every corner of the globe, the English Defence League did, and that happened so quick, so fast. And along with that came death threats, and basically the biggest problem has been the persecution from the police and the establishment, and tax. I read a thing that a lot of the Tea Party members were getting these tax investigations. That's what I was reading about over in America.
Yes. And
that's exactly what they've done here. They come into me 4.5 years ago. They froze my assets. They come in, they arrested my wife. She was pregnant at the time. They arrested us on tax evasion and subsequently this mortgage fraud, which I just pleaded guilty and went to jail for. And when they arrested us on that, it was 4.5 years ago, and they said I owed them tax money and money laundering. Now, after 2 years, they charged me, and then I just had my court trial. Now, I knew the whole way through this I'm getting a not guilty. I knew it, because I haven't done it. I had 7 mortgages between me and my wife. The actual mortgages that I pleaded guilty to, one was my brother-in-law's and one was my cousin's. They were not my mortgages. All I'd done is lent them money before they bought their houses. And these frauds were not frauds where anyone lost any money. They were simply self-certification mortgages where if my brother-in-law, for example, earned £12,000 a year, but on the form he put that he earned 24. So that's the fraud. Yeah, it's some very minor.
I already looked at this, and I knew that you were going to bring it up. So it's good that you're talking about it so that people will understand. But I have already looked at it.
Because the thing you have to understand, each time they get a headline, yeah. So, for example, when they set fire to poppies, these Muslims in London, they set fire to poppies, and at that time, I jumped over a fence and I tried to stop them setting fire to the poppies. Anyone wants to watch the video, they can. If they just go on YouTube and put in Tommy Robinson poppy burning, you'll see the full video. Now, before the police realised it was on video, I got charged with assaulting a police officer. Now, if you want to see the spin machine in action, okay, they set fire to poppies, which got the whole country outraged, and the BBC, our main broadcaster, did not report it. What they'd done is, when I got charged by the time I come out the next morning, and I was charged with assaulting a police officer, it went everywhere. All over the whole country's BBC. In every local town, in every local city, on their local BBC News bulletin was EDL leader charged of assaulting police officer. Now, that's the headline. That's what they want. That's what it's all about. And then when I went to court, and I actually got in court, and we produced a video, which clearly showed I didn't assault a police officer at all, they dropped that straight away. But they've already had their gain from it because they've put their headline out that I've assaulted a police officer. It's like now they've discredited me as a fraudster. But when I was going to court for this fraud charge, I got not guilty, and I got not guilty on the tax, yeah, so on a Thursday. And what the police then done, which I've got copies of it here, the police gave me a memorandum of understanding, which basically said that Al-Shabaab, there was a terrorist video put up from Somalia, and it named me and told all supporters that I was to be killed, yeah, by Al-Shabaab. So counter-terrorism have briefed me, they've briefed my family saying, look, your life's in danger, and because my wife here, I've got my kids here, all these different things. And so they've give us that, and then on the next day, when we're in court, they've stood up and they've set a date in front of the press and in front of everyone for my wife to stand trial for tax, yeah? I've just got not guilty on tax. My wife hasn't committed any tax fraud. She'd have got not guilty as well. But they've told her to stand trial for tax. And they know what that's going to do. See, and I knew this was the end game. I've read all of this before here. I've said to my wife, even down to the conditions I'm on now, I knew I was going to get. Because I thought, what would I do if I was them? I knew exactly what they're going to do. And so basically then I have the whole weekend of my wife's petrified, because I've been leading the English Defence League for 5 years. No one knows what my wife looks like. There's not one picture of my wife, yeah? Because online, if you go and try and find a picture now of my wife, you can't, yeah? And that's been difficult to do, but I've managed to do it. And the same with my kids. So my wife can walk through Luton and she doesn't get spat, she doesn't get attacked, yeah? And the police know full well, from their having to come around my house all the time over threats and things like that, they know my biggest problem is the security of my family for what I've been doing, yeah? And it's the biggest worry on the back of my mind all the time. And they know that. So that by making her stand trial and letting the press know and letting everyone know, I went home for the entire weekend and my wife was in pieces, a complete breakdown, because she's terrified that she's going to be pictured, photographed, and then she can't walk with the kids and everything. Her whole life's going to change the way that mine does. Like if we go out, we go out in separate cars. Yeah? So I never walk with my wife and kids. You'll never see me walking with my wife and kids in my hometown. Because I can't. Because they'll be
sad. It's really sad that you've had to rearrange your life.
And it's reality. That's the reality, yeah? So then when I've got to court on the Monday morning, the police have then said, if you plead guilty to these charges, which I knew was coming, you plead guilty to these charges, we'll drop your wife, yeah? And I knew that. And I knew it. So then I rang my wife, and what they originally asked me to plead guilty to was 3 charges. Now, I rang my wife, and I was going to get 3 to 5 years in prison for that. So I rang my wife and said, look, I'm going to have to plead guilty, because if not, you're going to be up there. And she said, how long will you get? I said, I'll get 3 to 5 years. And that's what I was expecting to get. And then she's gone mad, saying, don't you dare do that. Because she knows I haven't done it. She knows what I was in court for was a complete farce, yeah? So then I've gone back in and I said, no, I'm not taking your deal. I'm going to trial, yeah? They've sworn the jury in. I've got 3 Muslims on my jury. They've sworn the jury in. Then just literally before it starts again, they stop, they come outside and say, plead guilty to these 2 charges. Last opportunity, plead guilty to these 2 charges. So then my solicitor said you'll get a maximum of 2 years, yeah? Now, a maximum of 2 years means that I would end up serving approximately 9 months in a cell. Yeah, but now, for me, that's something I have to weigh up. Would I rather spend 9 months in a cell or wreck my wife's life? Yeah. So I then went back in and I pleaded guilty. And when I pleaded guilty, I was given 18 months. And I've come out of custody, and obviously they've got the headline that I was a fraudster, which they've run everywhere, but it's not my fraud. I mean, it's my brother-in-law and my cousin. It had nothing to do with me. The police spent 4 years going through every single financial transaction I've ever done. When I had my own businesses prior to this, when I've looked at their investigation, they even went and got warrants for my mum and dad's bank accounts, so they could go through my mum and dad's bank accounts. So they pulled in my cousins, they raided my nans, they pulled in anyone in the family they could. And then
Tommy, are you going to write a book about this?
It's that's what I want to do, because there's so many people, you know, like I left the EDL, yeah, And so many people, I left the EDL in October, and so many people don't realise why, or I haven't publicly spoken about all of the ins and outs, everything that was happening at that moment in my life, the reasons I gave, which are true to the reasons I gave as well. But at no time, when I left, I said, like, I was fed up of far-right Nazis and things like that. Yeah? In no way was the EDL taken over with Nazis, in no way at all. It was a very small minority. Everyone at the EDL, the sort of people who go to the EDL, are the most decent people I've met in my life, across the movement, and the bravest people. And but when I tell the full story, which is why I want to tell the full story, because most people, I get judged a lot. Everywhere I go, I get judged, and there's this big slanderous campaign to judge and defame everything I'm saying. But I think if people knew the full story from start to finish, well, this is why this happened, this is why we started, this is what happened next. Even now, for example, I've come out of jail and I'm on conditions that I'm not allowed to contact anyone associated with the EDL, yeah? Now, I was in for mortgage fraud. What has that got to do with the English Defence League?
They're trying to control you. That is the idea, is to muzzle you.
It just shows that the whole case was politically motivated. And even since then, which I haven't publicised either, and the reason why I haven't publicised it is because I'm just waiting for the interview tape. I come out of jail, and 6 weeks I was out, and I was arrested again. And I've got the interview tape. My solicitor rang me today. They've got the interview tape because I want to put the interview online about why I was arrested. I was held for 23 hours again. I was strip searched naked. I was released on bail. I've just had the charges dropped last week. This has been ongoing. I mean, like, I think I've been in court more times than a judge in the last few years. I've constantly, every time one thing gets dropped, another comes. And I could never work it out, even for the whole 5 years. They arrested me on the most trivial, pathetic little things to do with demonstrations like, yeah.
Wait a minute. Let's back up a little bit. Tell me why you started the EDL, and then tell me why you left it.
I started basically an inability and an unwillingness by anybody to tackle what I saw as evil and real fascism, which was these Islamic militants who wish to implement Sharia law across all of us. And I've grown up in Luton, which is one of the most multicultural towns in Europe, you know, and everyone's integrated. Everyone, the Sikhs, the Hindus, the Jews. Well, actually, there's no Jews left. They've all run and left. But the West Indians, black community, and there's been a problem. And the problem has come from the Islamic community. There's been an unwillingness to integrate. There's been a hostility shown towards us. And I could never understand it, but until I started really looking into it. And we formed the EDL as a pressure movement to raise awareness to these issues. Now, for the last 5 years, many of the issues we've been talking about, Muslim grooming gangs, Sharia courts, female genital mutilation, the Islamisation of our schools and our universities, these sort of things, where we've been rubbished. And only in the last 12 months, since I went to jail, I've sat and watched on the news as every single thing.
Vindicated.
Every single thing we've said is now public knowledge. Every single thing we've said. And it's like, so we have, at a time as well, I said I saw it as our job or our duty as dads and fathers and as Englishmen was we're not going to be the people to bring about change. We're working class people who are out on the street. We were never going to be the people to bring about change. What we wanted to do was cause such a stir and such a storm that the people sitting up there in the positions of power, the people educated to lead a country, would then listen and see.
You wanted to bring attention to the problem, to the issues.
Attention to the issues, and give people courage that they can talk about these issues. Because up until the English Defence League, people would talk to each other and they'd whisper the word Islam. They'd be like, Islam. Everyone was too scared and fearful. And that's come from basically a generation when we had Labour in control, and Labour used political correctness and used the racist stick to beat everyone down in order to silence them, because what Labour were busy doing was bringing in the immigrant vote, staying loyal to the Muslim community, because they can see the future demographic of this country. If they want to control and keep power, that's where their vote's going to come from. All and right. Basically, it used to be a working class vote. That's who they used to represent. But then they forgot us and they neglected us, and that's what we saw happening. So our job was to raise awareness to this, and we have, and that's what we've done, and I believe we've been successful in doing that.
Okay, Tommy, I just want to say to the listener out there that what Tommy's describing is exactly what I talk about when I talk about the illegal aliens coming over the border, and that our politicians are talking, especially the Democrats are talking, which is the Labor Party. It's equal to your Labor Party. It's the same ideology. Our Democrats are equal to the Labor Party in the UK. And what they want is that vote. They want that
give them
illegal alien person who comes from another country, who doesn't understand anything about our Constitution or anything about our Bill of Rights. Those people just want to be helped. And they know that if they say, well, we're here to help you, we're going to give you food, you don't have to work, they become a ward of the state. But it doesn't matter, because those people who are doling out the goods, who doling out our tax money, are the ones, they want to keep their power.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. And now all the towns that are mainly controlled by Labour are the ones with the Islamic communities, because that's where, like in my town, for example, we have probably 50,000 Muslims in our town, and Labour don't care about the rest of the town, because they will get a block vote by sitting down with the leader of the council of mosques. They've got 26 mosques. By sitting down with him and doing their deals and agreeing whatever they want to agree, they'll get reinstalled. So it doesn't matter what we want.
Now, I also heard you say on Bill O'Reilly's show, when he asked you about being called a racist and that the organization had been called racist, you made mention that you had a gay and lesbian group, that you had different groups. What were they? Yeah,
we set the English Defence League up in the same ethos that I've been brought up in Luton, yeah? Where, to be honest, majority of my friends are sons of immigrants. All of us in Luton are pretty much sons of immigrants. My mum was an Irish immigrant, but a lot of my friends are West Indian. You've got Bulgarian, Italians, Jamaicans, St. Lucians. That's what makes up the mixture of Luton. So when we started off, it was on that ethos. It was that everyone's welcome. Doesn't matter. And at the same time, this threat, this ideology, it has no colour. Yeah. And to defeat it, you need everybody who is a threat from it. Now, the lesbian and gay community are a serious threat from it. Because they'd have them executed at the click of their fingers. And we had a Sikh division, we had a Hindu division, we had a Jewish division, but we had all different divisions that represented the makeup of this country. And but we were continually called far right, continually called racist, which at the same time there were elements that tried to attach themselves to our organisation which didn't help us at all. And at the same time, some of our tactics didn't help us, and we did have a real serious image problem. That's because we're working class people, and we're out on the streets trying to get a message across. We've got no other choice or no other option to get that message across. As we've seen in Rotherham, where the councillors are working with the police to conspire to suppress the truth, that's what's happening in all of our towns. So we can approach our local Labour council and start talking about these issues, because they don't want to hear. They don't want to listen. They want to suppress those issues and pretend they're not there, because they don't want to rock the multicultural boat. And so we had no choice. People say, yeah, but you're on the streets, you're marching through the streets, you look like thugs. Well, we had no choice but that. So I'm sorry, we didn't have a voice or a platform to talk about these issues, so we created one. And when we created it, we used it as best we could. And we minimised violence, and we've done everything we could to make sure that our demonstrations were peaceful. Of course, at times, you've got, for example, if I talk to you about one incident, we had a demonstration up in the north of England, and I'd spent the night there the night before, and I met this lad whose sister was a victim of one of these grooming gangs, and she was 12 years old, and she's been continually gang raped by these Muslim men. And the police, the family have gone to the police, they've begged the police, and none of them are helping them. So when we had our demonstration the next day, and it's kicking off between our supporters and the police, I've gone over to try and keep order and ask people to stop causing trouble. And who did I see at the front with the most aggression I've ever seen? It was the girl's brother. And so who am I in that situation when the police have failed him? These children have been failed. That's his sister. Of course he's angry. So when people see English Defence League supporters and they see some aggression, I think you don't know the stories behind it a lot of the time. You don't know what's happened to those people. You don't know what's gone in their community. And there is a reason why people are resentful and angry. And it's justified anger. And when the police fail you, as they have in many of these towns and cities, people are going to be angry with the system. And they are. And at no time, let's not pretend that the English Defence League have killed anyone or committed any acts of terrorism. They didn't. They didn't. We held protests where, at worst, a few things got thrown. At worst, Now, in hindsight, when we've seen acts of terrorism and our soldiers having their heads cut off, and other instances, I know you've just seen recently in America where there's people rioting because someone's been shot dead. Well, when our soldiers was beheaded, our communities did not go out and riot. The English Defence League did not go out and riot. We expressed our anger, but we've done it democratically, and we tried to do it as peacefully as we can. And then it got to the point, obviously, where we said I left the English Defence League, and that was in October. I left just 3 weeks before my court case. I left, and when I left with Muslims who are ex-extremists, and I wanted to spend time with them, and they tackle extremism, they highlight extremism, and I don't work with them, or I don't work for them. I didn't leave to work for them. I left. They facilitated me leaving. I spent time discussing issues with them. I'm yet to be convinced that it can work or it's going to work, but I think we should do everything we can to try and solve any problems we've got.
No, I agree with that. As a matter of fact, I watched some of the YouTube videos and the documentary that was done. I think the BBC did a documentary on you. Was that right? Was it the BBC?
They did, okay. Yeah, where I met basically Maajid Nawaz, who is standing for the Lib Dems over in this country to be a politician, and you've got Osama Hassan, who's an imam who about 5 years ago come out and he spoke for evolution, and he spoke out in support of our troops, and he received many death threats, and he criticises it. I said, if we find British Muslims in this country who want to tackle adultery, stoning of women, speak out against killing of apostates, tackle and say that certain verses in the Quran are out of date and not to be implemented, and they're very vocal in tackling these extremism, I think they deserve our support. And I said, if there are Muslims out there that are willing to tackle it, then they should be used in order to tackle the extremism, and they are. And I'm not going to pretend that there are no great Muslims in this country, because there's many, and I've met many since leaving the English Defence League, but at the same time, it's like when I was in custody this last time, the problem I have is the moderates aren't really doing much. No, when I was in jail and I'm getting my head violently kicked in by loads of Muslims, the moderate Muslims in there are sitting watching. And on the outside, it's like I just wish we saw, which from small acorns mighty trees grow. Maybe it will start, but I think we're wishful thinking. And I just wish that we saw them taking the same stance as they do when there's a Gaza war, or sort of the Jews have done something wrong in their mind. They all come out in the streets in anger, or there's been a cartoon. What we've seen is members of the Muslim community have been systematically raping and drugging young non-Muslim girls, and I haven't seen much anger from anybody. And it's disheartening, and it's a real issue. It's a real issue.
It is. You know, Chaudhry says that he believes that America and Great Britain will one day be under Sharia law. He's unapologetic either, too. No, but the point is, see, when they say, you see, to some people who are miles away from this and have not read up or investigated any of this, if you say in this country, I said I think Sharia law will come to this country, people think you're a madman. Yeah? But I try and talk about my hometown of Luton, and I say 30 to 40 years ago, in this town, in this British town, in this English town, if you'd have said to the residents of this town, in 30 to 40 years, because there was only probably 1,000 Muslims at that time, yeah? If you'd have said, in 30 to 40 years, you'll have 50,000 Muslims, you'd have 26 mosques, every restaurant would be halal, the emblem of St George would be banned in the schools, you will not have Christmas lights going up this year, all these different things. You'll have radical Muslims attacking the soldiers as they parade through the streets. All these different things. You'll have a Sharia court. You'll have the headquarters of Al-Mujahideen, the most extremist organisation in the world. All these different things. If you'd have said that 34 years ago to people from Luton, they'd have said, "God, you're mad. That will never happen." Well, it's happened. It's happened. And we've sleepwalked into it. So if we try and progress another 30, 40 years, we look at the demographic, the statistics, it's alarming. And certainly it wouldn't be if we didn't see the sort of things we're seeing now with ISIS. We're seeing now that our government are planning on allowing them to come back, and they plan to de-radicalise them. So that's what we see. And if we didn't, it wouldn't be a problem, but we do. We see extremism, we see radicalisation, and to be honest, it's scary. Just you look out there and think about it, and think about what's going on. It's terrifying, especially if you're in a town that's plagued by it,
and you've got young children, and you're thinking about them and thinking about what's it going to be like them, how many of their rights are going to be eroded? How many of their freedoms are going to be eroded? We're already treated differently, as we've seen. We've seen with the police, and what this report's done in Rotherham, it's sort of, we've said for years that it's not just to do with grooming, this issue, yeah, where the political correctness has suppressed what's happening. Violence by hostile Muslim youth against non-Muslims in the same way is suppressed. And I've always said for years, if you could draw the dot to dots of attacks from some Muslim youth against non-Muslims, then we might already see that a street-level jihad's been launched. And when we talk about this grooming, you make it sound like you're going to groom a dog. This is rape. And that's why it's rape jihad. Rather than grooming in all these towns and cities, it's an epidemic that's been going on. And it's still going on today. And,
okay, stop for a second. I want people to know who I'm talking to because people are coming on the air and I'm getting some text messages and they're asking who the name of the guest is. This is Tommy Robinson. He's an activist. He's the former co-founder and leader of the English Defence League in the UK. And we're talking about Islam, the effects that it's had on Luton and in the UK. And he's been basically for years sounding the alarm about the dangers of radical Islam. And that's what we're discussing right now. Okay.
Yeah. And obviously, for me, it's just people are saying, what now? What are you going to do now? I'm still on a financial restraint, so my hands are still tied on many issues. I've been on this financial restraint for 4.5 years, which basically prohibits you from having a bank account, it prohibits you from working or having a business. And all of this is from this mortgage fraud charge. And then now I'm waiting to go to court in 4 weeks because they want me to pay £162,000. And if I don't pay £162,000, then you get another 3 years in jail. So all this is.
How are you doing this? What are you doing?
That charge relates to the mortgage fraud. So basically, the whole amount, even though the mortgage companies were paid back, now what we've introduced in this country is confiscation orders, where you have to basically.
Do you have a fund? People can give to?
No, when they arrested me, I had 7 properties. So my assets are frozen. Yeah, so I've got equity in properties because prior to the English Defence League, I'd bought quite a few properties because I was doing well in business.
No, but I'm asking. Tell me what I'm
asking. I don't have a fund. No.
You don't have a non-profit fund. I don't know how you all do it there, but where people could send money for your defence.
No. Every time, even the English Defence League, whenever we set something up, whenever we set something up like that. It either got frozen again, we had PayPal freeze it, or at that time we had all these other people involved in the English Defence League who would start campaigns saying you're all doing it for profit, if you know what I mean. That's all we ever had on. While I was leading the English Defence League, because I took it a certain way, there was always these certain people and these groups and all these splinter groups that formed around the English Defence League who wanted to do everything they could to discredit me and attack me and attack my integrity on many issues because they wanted to steer it in a different way. For obviously, as the English Defence League, we supported Israel and its right to exist, and many people did. Many of these little groups didn't like that. We said we're not actually against all immigrants, and they didn't like that. So any time, if I was starting saying, "Oh, we need money for this, we need money for that," it just becomes such a headache in the end. And even now, if what will happen, if they hit me for the 162 grand, they'll just force the sale of my properties and they'll take the 162 grand.
I see.
That's what they're doing, yeah.
So that's one way of trying to, they've
basically, we put you in prison and now we want to take everything you got, basically.
Yeah.
And then I've got another court case in November because 2 years ago at an English Defence League demonstration when we were giving our speeches took 37 minutes instead of taking 30 minutes. And I've got a court case for that. It's just mad. The things, basically, what they've done and what they've been allowed to do, because I've been a controversial figure, they're allowed to get away with it. Because, for example, when I was in custody, I don't know if I told you this, when I was in custody in 2012, I went to jail because I flew to America. Basically, I went to America in 2011 on September the 11th, and I wanted to go to New York to pay my respects. And when I landed at JFK, I was held, and they told me that the British authorities had contacted them and told them not to let me in. I was held for 6 hours and I was deported. I was refused my visa. Even though I'd been to America 3 times in the previous 2 years, I've been to Las Vegas. They deported me, but basically because of my political belief and because of what we were doing at the time
under
over
what
here.
grounds, though?
My visa. They just said there was an error on my visa.
Okay.
And the problem, and with that, you see in this country, what they managed to do is what we were talking about and the issues we were raising. There were no mainstream, powerful political voices, whether it be radio hosts, TV presenters, politicians, no one that would dare say what we were saying. So they managed to keep us isolated as a group that they could call far right and that they could keep limited on the street in numbers. And they could slander us. But with going to America, we had plans to meet up with some quite influential people in your country who were quite open to talking and criticising the ideologies around Islam. So they didn't want that because that would have given us kudos and it would have given us an air of
gravitas.
Yeah, so that's the last thing they wanted. So then they deported me, and the next year I thought, I want to go, yeah? And not just that I want to go and that I don't have respect for the law, but I don't see why I shouldn't be able to go. I wanted to go to New York. I wanted to pay my respects to the fallen victims on September 11th, and I felt that I had a message which needed to be brought to America. Now, my message is a lifelong experience of growing up in a town that's plagued with extremist Islam. And I wish that someone would have come to my town and told me 15, 20 years ago, this is what's going to happen. And it's coming, so brace yourself, yeah? So I flew to America. I took my friend's passport, who looks pretty much like me, similar to me anyway. And I flew in on September 10th, 2012, and I got in. And I didn't expect to get in. If I'm honest, when I went, I didn't expect to get in. I thought I'd get arrested. I thought I may even go to prison in America. But at the time, I weighed it all up, and I thought it was something I was prepared to do because I felt the message we had to bring to America, and even the publicity around getting arrested or put in prison over there, it would bring people to our message. It would bring people to listening to what we're saying. And I went and I got in, and I gave a speech at a conference held by Robert Spencer and Pamela Geller, and I flew home the next day, and I got home. And 6 weeks later, I was arrested on the M25, which is a motorway in England, and I was imprisoned for 10 months for using someone else's passport to go to America.
Wow, okay.
And at that time, when I was in jail, I was held on solitary confinement. I was not allowed out of my cell, basically, and I was told it was against my human rights. So my family on the outside were trying to contact human rights lawyers to represent me, and none of them would. They couldn't find everyone they're ringing. As soon as I said that he's the leader of the English Defence League, they all backed off. So my family looked and found there's a very famous case over here where a young boy who was 4 years old was murdered. His name was Jamie Bolger. He was murdered by two 12-year-olds, and they cut his penis off, and the things they've done to him are so horrific and so disgusting, and they tied him to a train track and they killed him, yeah? Now, my family looked at the human rights lawyer to find who represented them, because if he represented those killers, then he must be able to represent me. Now, when they rang him up, and he represented those scumbag murderers that killed that kid, and he would not represent me. So that's when I was sitting in there thinking, this is how bad it is. If you speak out against Islam, you are so isolated, and everyone is so fearful of being associated with you or linked with you in any way, that even a man that represents child killers was not willing to represent me. And that was in 2012. And as I said, I don't.
What are you going to do?
What am I going to do now?
What are you going to do now?
I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for my tag to come off. I'm waiting for my other court cases I've got going on. So as soon as I come out, because I've been away, I said that obviously everything I've been doing for the last 5 years has caused so much misery in my wife's life, in my family's life, made it so difficult for them with everything that I promised them when I come home. I'll just spend some time concentrating on my family, getting my life back together. But at the same time, I want to spend, because I've got these conditions, I want to spend the next 12 months detailing and writing and writing a book of everything that's gone on. So that, and then use that. There's a documentary that I was working on that were filming me for the last year, and I'm talking in Oxford University. Have you heard of Oxford University?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got a few things planned. I'm talking there as a guest, and I've got a few different things planned, and hopefully that'll be the ending to this program that they've been filming, and use that. But obviously, I would like to have, when I come out, and I did promise my family, I'd like to have cut away and not talked about these issues ever again, yeah, and concentrated on my family. But it's too difficult, and I'm too passionate about it. I'm having murders now with my wife about it, because I've been talking about it. But I see it as so important and such an important issue. And if we don't solve it, or we don't fix it, or we don't do everything we can, then the future is drastic, and it's terrifying.
The future is bleak. Yeah.
The future is bleak. When you see, so for example, we have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're monitoring 3,500 radical terrorists who wish to murder us. Yeah, our security services are. Well, we see a minimum of 1,000 now have flown out for ISIS. If you've got 1,000 young men that are willing to fly to the Middle East in order to die, then you can bet you've got tens of thousands that are extremely sympathetic to that view in this country already. And they're coming back, and that's what I don't see the government tackling it. We keep getting told they're going to be tough on radicalisation, tough on extremism. It's getting worse.
What would you like to see them do?
I'd like to see them, one thing they have to do ASAP is tackle the situation of how it is in the prison system. If people could see it, it's nuts, mate. The prison system and the Category A jails, which is the first one I was sent to, they're basically like an ISIS training camp, where the white English lads and the black lads and everyone is walking around with huge beards, and they're all radicalised. And they're basically going in there for nicking a car and coming out a radical jihadist. We've got 800 a year that are coming out of the prison system. Every institution in this country, whether it be the prison system, whether it be universities, and even schools now we've seen, are being used to radicalise the next generation. And they're not doing anything. They set up a government task force after the death of Lee Rigby. And this task force was supposed to be to tackle these issues. Now, since the death of Lee Rigby, as I've said, we've had 1,000 Muslims that have left Britain to fight for ISIS, and now they're all coming back. And they're letting them all back. And so this task force hasn't actually done anything. And sadly, I thought the death of Lee Rigby would be a moment that would change a lot and change everything, but unfortunately it hasn't.
Yes, that was just horrific. And
horrific.
It was horrible.
And it's like it's been forgotten already. It's like it's been forgotten, and that we come to, we become so used to this terrorism. And
so complacent.
Complacent. That's the worry, that that things should be like this, and our children will be born into a generation of thinking this is how it is, and this is not how it is, and it's not how it should be, and it's not how it ever was. And I've seen.
Did you ever consider leaving Luton?
It's like I always say to people, why should we? And people, everyone is cutting and running, so people are moving out, and obviously I have the safety to think of my family, but at which point do people stop running? Because unless these issues are confronted, and I've seen a lot now, and a lot of people, there was a lot of criticism aimed at me with when I left the EDL because of how I left. People didn't know, and I think a lot of people felt betrayed the way I left. But they don't know the full story behind everything that went on. And even when I went and left with Quilliam, a lot of the issues that you see getting raised, whether it be the radicalisation in schools and all these different issues, they're a part of bringing those to a forefront. This organisation is, and Osama, who's he's the religious imam there, he's in the forefront of tackling the radicalisation. But I don't really know where to move forward in the best way. What I'll be doing in the future, I don't know. At the minute, I'm just getting through each court case, and hopefully, when I get after my next court case, I can reevaluate everything. And the main thing I want to do is just tell the story so that everyone understands what's gone on and how it's gone on, and people can understand and see what's going to happen, because what's happening here is coming there.
Right.
Sorry to tell you, it's coming.
Let me take an opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and give the number out. If anybody wants to call in and ask you a question, do you mind answering?
Yeah, of course, I don't mind.
Okay. Well, the number here is 239-300-2267. 239-300-2267. I've got Tommy Robinson, the former leader and co-founder of the EDL English Defense League, on the line. He's on the air. So if you have a question for him, this is the opportunity to ask him. In the meantime, I thought I would just, ask you a couple of more things. Let me see. You mentioned Quilliam, but I don't think that people know who he is. I did.
So Quilliam is.
Tell us?
So Maajid Nawaz was he was part of Hizb ut-Tahrir, which are a politicised extremist organisation wishing for a world caliphate. And he spent
You're going to
years
have to say that again because your accent gets in the way sometimes.
Yeah, sorry, I talk fast as well, don't I? But Majid Nawaz was, who's the head of Quilliam, he spent 4 years in prison in Egypt. He was a member or a leader of Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is trying to get a world caliphate. And he came back to England when he got out, and he denounced his extremism. And there was an issue, I had an issue when I left, because Quilliam have spoke out against Pamela Geller and Robert Spencer. And I've had a lot of Muslims that I've met since leaving the EDL who speak out, or they call Robert and Pamela extremists, in the same way they called us extremists. But I'm yet to find any of them to tell me what they actually said or done that's extreme. So, or that's incorrect. But it's exactly the same way where we was branded in the same way. I was branded as an extremist, but once I've talked to most Muslims, we get past that, and they see that I'm not extremist. I'm just taking the same viewpoint as many of the radicals are, and saying that this needs to be tackled. This extremism needs to be tackled. And for any of you listeners that are listening, I've been going on a lot about police persecution and things like that. I do want to state that I am no angel at the same time, yeah. So I don't claim to be sitting polishing my halo. But if it wasn't for how I've been brought up, or where I've been brought up, then I would never have led the English Defence League anyway. So you have to have the pros and the cons, because people say that, they call us football hooligans, but at the same time, I would not have had it in me to stand up and continue to stand up for 5 years with all the death threats and all the violent attacks that we're constantly under. So, I didn't want to sound like I'm just bleating and crying about all the things that the state and the system have been doing. If it was just a smack on the nose every week, I'd take it. But it's the mental torture of my family, which the police have facilitated and taken part in. And and really the biggest effects on my wife and even my mother. My wife's dad said I'm the son-in-law from hell, which I'm not really going to argue with. Not really going to argue with, because it's not bad. It's just I'm the son-in-law from hell because 1 minute I was marrying his daughter, and the next minute I'm the leader of the English Defence League, and terrorists want to kill me and are planning to kill me. We've had 6 Muslims who were caught with guns, bombs, an IED, and they were on their way to attack our demonstration, and they were going to murder and kill as many people as they could. They got 25 to 30 years, and then I actually got stuck in prison with them on my last sentence.
Really?
I got put in the same jail. It didn't end very well for me. Let's put it that way.
Wow.
But again.
Well, Tommy, I really want to say this, that in my mind I see you as a hero, okay? You're going through a really difficult time, and this life has not been really kind to you, but I believe that that history will say very good and positive things about you, and I know that doesn't help you now.
I know
what
what
you're doing is a great service, not just
we've said
to
that
the
many
UK,
times.
but to
I've said that
humanity.
many times. Yeah, I've said that many times at English Defence League when we was at EDL demonstrations, that don't worry about politicians judging you, don't worry about the newspapers judging us, because history will judge us all. And what I didn't expect was to live to see parts of history already judging us. And when you said we've been vindicated, basically everything, we've been belittled, and we've been told that we're scaremongering about these issues, and all of them have now come out in public knowledge. All of them.
Yes.
And they will continue to. They will continue to flood and come out, because what we've only seen is just scratching beneath the surface of some of the problems that have been hidden in this country.
Yes, these people haven't changed.
They haven't changed, and the cat's out of the
worse.
bag. The cat's out of the bag, and they've been scrambling to try and put it back in for the last 5 years, and it's well and truly out now. And it's whilst I felt awkward, or I felt ashamed taking any satisfaction out of that Rotherham report, but because of the horrendous conditions and things that have done to those young kids. But these issues need to be out in the public. People need to understand, because unless you can get to the root cause of the problem, we have to get into the mindset, yeah? Because yes, the majority of paedophiles in this country are white. You would expect that, considering 92% of the country is white, yeah? But paedophiles usually act as lone predators, or they have to find other sick, weird, strange individuals online to take part in their gruesome acts. These Muslim gangs were sharing young girls with their brothers, their cousins, their work colleagues. Yeah? So that shows a mindset that is sort of accepted. It's like they can turn around to their work colleagues and turn around to their friends and their family and say, let's share this 10, 11, 12-year-old girl. And what we saw is, in Rochdale, on one of these grooming trials, one of the local 6 Muslims were on trial, and one of the local Muslim politicians, he went to court and gave a character reference for one of the men who had been raping the young girls. Now, when the man was convicted and sent to prison for raping all these young English girls, there was no outcry again from the Islamic community, no demand. This counsellor who had gone and gave a character reference for a paedophile was not sacked or suspended. We also saw the ex-mayor of that city, who was a Muslim, went to court and gave a character reference for one of the other ones. So we've seen again in this report, it says that local influential Pakistani Muslim counsellors were acting as barriers from preventing this. And one of the main Pakistani Muslim counsellors was actually cousins with one of the main groomers. And his other son, is a police officer in the police force that's suppressing it. So to tackle the issue, you have to really get to the mindset that you have an ideology that's bringing you up to believe that having sex with 11, 12, 13-year-old girls is actually okay. And I've been corrected. I've been on talk shows in Britain where I've been talking about the rape of these young girls, and I've had a Muslim woman correct me and say they're young women. Because we have to understand that under Sharia, or under Islam, when a girl starts her puberty, she becomes a woman. So if she's 11, she's a woman. She's 12, she's a woman. That's not us. It's ridiculous and it's backward, but that's not the case at all. These are young children. And even if you watch that BBC documentary, I said maybe we're wrong in doing this. Maybe it's not right. But the verses in the Quran that say you can have sexual slavery, yeah? What we've seen is Boko Haram have now exposed all of this because the leader stood there and said we are instructed by Allah to sell these girls as sexual slaves. We've then seen ISIS doing exactly the same. Now, what all these men in Rotherham would have to do is convince themselves to morally justify what they're doing is that Britain is a house of war, al-Dahrab. As soon as they do that, then these girls are their sexual slaves and they're captives in war. And that is exactly how they're using them. So is that the link? Is that the reason why we have 90% of grooming convictions in this country are Muslim men? 90% out of a community of 4%? We have a massive problem. And until
that is a massive problem.
That's a massive problem. And until you get to, and people say it's Pakistanis, but we've seen Bangladeshis, we've seen Iranians, we've seen North African Muslims. The link is these men are all Muslim, and the link is whether it is to do with it's Islam, whether it's to do with the religious scripture, whether it's to do with they're brought up with an intolerance and belief, as we've seen in this recent Trojan horse plot, which was the takeover and Islamisation of state schools, where in the school assembly, one of the teachers said in the school assembly that white women are prostitutes. So they're bringing these children up with these intolerant views of white women, that they're filthy and that they deserve it. And when you hear certain politicians, I remember, for example, after the Sydney, I don't know if you saw the Sydney beach riots in Australia, where basically Muslim men were attacking women in Sydney, and then there was a big riot. All the Australians come out and rioted, and the main imam said that if you leave a piece of meat outside the door, then the cats will scavenge on it. So what he was saying was that the women should be covered up. It's their fault because they should be covered up.
It's forcing women to have to change the way they dress, to start dressing the way they do in the Middle East, where they cover themselves from head to toe.
Yes, well, they're doing it now in Malmö. Swedish women are dyeing their hair black and to not act as to be provoking rape, which is how it's being put. So that's what the Imam said. So there is an intolerant view from groups, and obviously it's not every Pakistani, obviously it's not every Muslim, and there's many Muslims. I have grown up with Muslims who would be as horrified and sickened by these acts. But there's inherently a problem there. It's coming from within the community. It's not been tackled. The religious leaders have known it's going on. They haven't felt the need to tackle it. And there's no disgust or really resentment or anger shown at all towards these paedophiles within their community. At all. As I said, local councillors are going to court and giving them references. And there's no outcry or anger on the street, which we see so common over many other issues within the community.
Okay, well, Tommy, I'm almost out of time here. I have somebody else who's going to be coming on the line, and but I really appreciate you coming on the air with me today. This is Tommy Robinson, former leader of the EDL, English Defense League, and co-founder. And let's stay in touch. I'm anxious to know, as soon as you write a book, I want to have you on. I want to talk about your book. And we have our contact information now, so we're friends, and we will stay in touch.
Okay, God bless.
God bless you too. Wish you much luck in everything you do.
You too. Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.
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 Well, that was Tommy Robinson.